Hello there, welcome back. My name is Emma. It's so nice to have you here. This video is going to be my October wrap up. Let me just show you. October, I read 11 books, but can someone tell me why all of them were so big? Like, this was the month of reading huge, ridiculously long books. A couple of these were for uni. Actually, like 3 of them were for uni. I had one for the Dickens vs. Tolstoy book club, and then just some other spooky October reads, and they were just ridiculously long. It was an extremely busy month for uni and for school and for everything like that, and I'll get into those in a second. Also, because we're talking about books, of course, we're always talking about books, I want to thank the sponsor, who you probably know by now. You've heard me talk about them so many times, so you know the drill. Yes, it is book of the month. Thank you so much for working with me again. If you have somehow never heard of them or just want a refresher on how their system works, they are a book subscription box, monthly. You go online, you pick one book out of their selection of 5. You can also do some add-ons if you're feeling some extra books, because they've been having a lot of really amazing picks recently. If you want to use my code Emmy, you can get your first box for $9.99, and they're all hardcover books, which is an amazing price. So their team goes through thousands of books each and every month and picks the top 5 in a variety of different genres that they think you would really love. This month's picks, just to run you down them, we have The Collective by Alison Galen, which is about how far a grief-stricken mother will go to right a tragic wrong. It's about a group of mothers who share their stories of loss and potentially revenge, which leads them down a dark road. This is the one I'm most excited about. This is The Keeper of Night by Kylie Lee Baker. This cover is just so beautiful. It's about a protagonist who is half British Reaper, half Japanese Shinigami. Ren has been collecting souls in the London streets for centuries, but she is driven out of London and flees to Japan in search of the acceptance she's never gotten from her fellow Reapers. I'm so excited for this one. I would love to pick this up ASAP. Then we have A Little Hope by Ethan Joella. It is about a couple where one of them is diagnosed with cancer and they have to contend with everything that life brings them after that. This one looks amazing. This is K.M. Jackson's How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days. It's about our protagonist who is absolutely in love with Keanu Reeves, and so she enlists the help of her best friend, Truman, to help her get to Keanu Reeves's wedding or something like that. Finally, we have The Family by Naomi Krupitsky, which I believe is a new take on the American dream. It's also historical fiction. For their add-ons this month, we have both Will Smith's book as well as Emily Ratajkowski's book, so very intriguing. So those are the picks for November. I will leave a link down below if you're interested to get a little bookish box present each and every month for yourself. But thank you so much for sponsoring, and let's get into a rant that I just absolutely have to start this video off with, because I would like to just get this out of my system and also potentially out of my library. This is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. I did pick this up for October because I thought it was going to be a really spooky, fun, dark academia time, perfect for the spooky season. I hated it. Let's just get that out of the way. It was a sloppy mess all over the floor. I opened up the book, the plot fell out. This is about Mariana, whose sole personality seems to be grieving for her lost husband, and when she gets a phone call from her niece Zoe, who is studying at Cambridge, telling her that Zoe's friend has been murdered, she comes down to Cambridge from London, where she is working as a group therapist in order to be with her niece and, be a caregiver to her niece who's going through this traumatic time. However, Mariana takes it upon herself, with no training, no legal reason, to become a detective in this case, and her prime suspect is the handsome, mysterious American Greek tragedy professor named Edward Fosca. She is obsessed with this man. She becomes just so entrenched in her weird little mind, where reason apparently does not have any sort of sway or influence or home, that Edward Fosca is the murderer and that he's murdering a bunch of girls known as the Maidens, who are basically the circle of very pretty, very influential, very high up girls in his Greek tragedy class that, they have a weird little study thing going on. The characters in this book, I don't even think they deserve the name characters. I think, does anyone remember Flat Stanley? Did anyone read Flat Stanley? If these people turn sideways, I would probably not be able to see them. It was so disheartening and so frustrating to read about characters who literally don't even exist. Like a gust of wind could blow them away. On top of that, the believability of this book was just so nonsensical and so stupid. Honestly, like if someone tried to interfere in a crime scene, they would be kicked out. They would be charged. They would be charged with obstruction of justice, of interfering with a crime scene, and they could potentially even go to jail. But Mariana, for some reason, everyone just opened up to her, and suddenly there was this empire of opportunity to become a detective when she's literally just a group therapist. The mystery for me was incredibly lackluster. There was nothing thrilling, nothing suspenseful about this book. This is supposed to be like a psychological thriller kind of thing. I felt nothing. I was endlessly bored, just waiting for something to happen. In all honesty, most of this book takes place in a variety of cafes and restaurants where Mariana is interviewing people or trying to be a police officer. I guess the identity of the actual murderer in chapter 3. And if you read this book, you kind of know how, because Alex Michaelides does a really poor job of spreading your suspicions equally. There are so many loose ends in this book that are never wrapped up, never make any sense. I couldn't even keep track of all the characters. They all just seemed like they were born from one big potato, and then each character became a little baby fry, wherein they were all indistinguishable, all tasteless, all doused in grease, to the point where I just wanted to like slide this book off the table. I think I'm even more disappointed in going on quite a long rant because I really enjoyed The Silent Patient, which I read by the same author earlier this year. I think it was really well done. It got me, I fell for it, and I think it delved into a really interesting discussion about grief and trauma paired with Greek mythology. But I think in this one, Alex Michaelides just tried to like tack this book onto The Silent Patient, because if you read this, you know that there's like this psychotherapist world and characters from The Silent Patient actually appear in here. A concept I enjoy the idea of, like examining over a number of books, over a series or whatnot, a whole bunch of therapists' inner psyche, what's going on with them, things that therapists need to go to therapy for themselves, essentially. I think that's a great idea. It seemed like he just tried to tack on everything that he had kind of been praised for and achieved in The Silent Patient into another retelling of Greek tragedy and Greek myth. This one was way too on the nose. It was so trite, so cliche, the least subtle thing I've ever seen, and it just really took out all of that authenticity, all of that like love for Greek tragedy that I felt in The Silent Patient. This just made me really mad. So that is The Maidens. I gave it 2 stars. I could talk for so much longer about this, but just incredibly disappointed. I thought this was just plain old bad. Okay, so then I'm gonna move on to some university works I had to study. So first up, for my literature of crisis class, we read King Lear by Shakespeare. I really enjoyed discussing King Lear in class. Like, I adored it immensely. What we talked about, especially, most of which revolved around King Lear's identity and like his loss of identity when he realizes that he's just playing a role. People are not believing in his role as king anymore. This is about Lear, who decides at the very start of the play to split up his kingdom into 3 parts, give a piece each to his 3 daughters and their new husbands, which to a Renaissance audience would just be incredibly crazy, because the king and his kingdom are essentially one in the same body, and a man like that should never or would never kind of split that up and essentially dismember himself in the process. And so people are already like, you know, when the play begins, what is going on? Like, is this man losing his mind? And from there, you do follow him into a descent of madness of some sort. I think I would give this play 4 stars, but it's definitely one I enjoy less reading than discussing in class, and especially, you know, watching it, if you can like get your hands on a production of King Lear itself, I think is so much better. I just think, let me have surgeons, I am cut to the brains. It just gives me chills every time I read that line. I don't know. This is great. I don't really have very much else to say about it. If you're going into Shakespeare for the first time, or getting into him, this is not a play that I would want to read early on. It is one of his tragedies. I think it's probably one of the most tragic of his tragedies because of the way that it ends, but I did enjoy it. I don't think I'll be writing any essays on it if I can help it, because we studied other things that I love so much more, but I did read King Lear in October as well. Then I had an audiobook come in for a book that I was a little bit hesitant to see if I actually wanted to get into in October, and that is Nevernight by J. Kristoff. This is the first book in a trilogy. It is a grimdark fantasy about a girl named Mia, and essentially she grows up, she has to watch her father murdered at the hands of this government whose power really mirrors and mimics that of ancient Rome. I got this for Christmas a couple years ago, I think from my grandma, so thank you so much, Grandma. But wow, I guess I kind of was expecting good things, because I have adored the Illuminae files by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, and I've also read Aurora Rising by him and Amy Kaufman, which I loved as well. This, I think I gave this 4.5 stars. I know this I think it's a pretty polarizing grimdark fantasy because people really seem to either love it or hate it. I loved it. I loved it so much. I think it came at the absolute perfect time for me. I just fell into this story so hard. So basically, Mia, once she grows up, she decides to go and be trained at the Red Church, which is a school for assassins, because she now wants to direct her life's course towards the purpose of getting revenge on those who destroyed her entire family. Mia is also Darken, or someone who can kind of control and manipulate darkness and shadows, and she has this parasitic little shadow cat who is a shadow, who's also a cat, who's maybe a bit of both, we don't really know, named Mr. Kindly. This book, I don't know, it just gave me everything I wanted. I thought the writing was amazing. I do really like J. Kristoff's writing. Like, I can kind of see how people would fight for the point that it's very commercialized, very gaudy, very just kind of set up. And I do see that, but I really enjoy it. I really do like it. It's not like Neil Gaiman's writing where like I feel that about it and sometimes I don't enjoy it. I just really like what J. Kristoff writes. I really, really, really got invested. I listened to this book so slowly. I savored this book over a course of weeks, and it was just that kind of book where you literally lose hours. I lost hours just sitting in my apartment listening to this book because I could not put it down. Like, I thought it was incredible. I cannot wait to read the next one. I just thought it was so entertaining. The pacing was amazing. The stakes were so high. And I just really felt like this was executed really, really well. I love the footnotes. They were inserted into the audiobook perfectly for me. I think the footnotes were one of my favorite things ever because I love reading fantasy books and feeling like I can like study the fantasy world and learn more about it kind of at my will and at my choosing if I so choose. And like, I just love reading endless and needlessly complicated made-up history. Like, I really, really dig that. And just the world that Kristoff has created in here, absolutely loved it. I just loved it so much. Just really glowing things to say about this book. I love Mia. I just love Mia so much, and her cat. So that is Nevernight. I am so happy I picked this one up. Okay, then we're gonna bounce back to a manga that I picked up because I tried out and I still am in the middle of trying out a free trial of Kindle Unlimited, and I think someone had recommended this to me when I did a manga vlog, and that is LDK, or Living Dining Kitchen. Totally forget who this is by, but I read volume 1 on Kindle, and I flew through this. It's like so short, so easy to get through. I believe it is an older manga. I didn't love the art style, and if I'm honest, I didn't love the story either. It was just kind of this like quick, meaningless story about two best friends. One of them is in love with, like, you know, the prince of the high school, I guess you want to call him. He's quite popular, blah, 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 blah. But what ends up happening is that the other best friend, who are actually following and him, both find out that they're living in the same apartment complex, and when his apartment like floods or catches on fire or something, because of something our protagonist did, like an accident occurred, he has to move into her apartment, which, as you can imagine, is very small, being only a living space, a dining space, and a kitchen space. And it was just every single trope of, you know, enemies to lovers kind of living together in a small space, being forced to share a life together. The substance level was pretty empty. There wasn't a lot there. And I'm willing to read books that have, you know, 0.3% chance of precipitation of substance coming into its pages, but this was actually nothing there. So I don't think I'll be continuing on with it, but that is LDK. Okay, then can we please talk about my favorite book of the month? This was my favorite read that I got to in spooky season, and that is The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. Angela Carter. This was my first time reading Angela Carter, and all I can say is please go read her. Like, if you want gothic, if you want dark, gruesome, gory, violent, sensual, glittery, gauzy, gaudy fairy tales, this is the one for you. So The Bloody Chamber is a collection of Angela Carter's rewriting fairy tales, revitalizing them in the context of the gothic tradition and gothic genre. It covers things like Bluebeard, Puss in Boots, Beauty and the Beast, I think Sleeping Beauty, Little Red Riding Hood, and it was just so good. The Bloody Chamber was definitely my favorite story in this collection by far, but I also really, really loved the courtship of Mr. Lion as well as the Earl King, and The Company of Wolves. The language Angela Carter uses, like, I felt like it was just everything I've been waiting my whole entire life for to read in this book. Like, it's the kind that, like, comes out and punches you in the chest, and it just takes, like, your breath away, and you're like, I don't know why am I crying talking about this book? I just thought it was so beautiful. It was like what I had been waiting to step into. It's just language you want to put in your oven, warm it up, and like spoon feed into your mouth endlessly. Every single word is a diamond encrusted ruby set in a sapphire lining of jewels tucked into a plush red velvet little pearl infested pillow. That's the only way I can adequately describe it, and that's not even anywhere near good enough. There's just so much like luxuriating in death and blood and violence in a gothic atmosphere, in a gothic container, and it was spectacular. Just absolutely incredible. Like, you could spend your whole life, I think, writing essays on this collection and never get bored. But wow, 5 stars, unequivocally 5 stars. I only have one other Angela Carter book on my shelf right here that I haven't read, and that is The Infernal Desire Machines of Dr. Hoffman. But I am gonna keep my eyes open for everything else ever by her now, because this was exquisite. That is The Bloody Chamber. Whew, this next book I'm currently in the middle of writing an essay about. It's not really a book, it's a poem. But October was just a crazy month for me as well in school, because in both of my classes we started to look at 2 different epic poems, 2 of the most like influential things, really. And the first one is Paradise Lost. So I am in the middle of writing an essay on this, and then I'll get to the other one directly after that. But this is also for the Literature of Crisis class, because it concerns, of course, the first crisis. It follows the standard format of an epic having 12 books, and we were only supposed to read book 9 for class, as well as a little bit of book 1. So I did that, and then because I am in the middle of writing an essay, I of course ended up reading more than just that. So then I read all of book 4, I think, most of book 5, 6, 8, and then 9 as well. So if you've never heard of Paradise Lost, this is John Milton's take on transforming just a few sentences in the book of Genesis in the Bible into one big epic poem, justifying the ways of God to man. So it starts with the creation of the world. Of course, we have Satan's fall from heaven, Satan and the other demons and fallen angels creating hell and their little colony of hell. In the second half, mostly Adam and Eve getting set up in Eden in paradise, and then of course the fall of Adam and Eve from paradise. This was a reread for me because I've read not all of it, not all of Paradise Lost, or have I? I don't know. I had to read this in first year and in second year. It's just a book that I think every single professor wants to teach, and with good reason. It's incredible. Milton's language is also just wonderful. It's just filled with like these lines as well that just come out and like punch you. It is something that takes a lot of time to read. It's something that's quite slow moving because there's so many layers to read Paradise Lost on. This one thing that Eve asks, "For us alone was death invented." I also just think it's so funny that Eve like first sees herself in a reflection in the pond, and she's like, oh, who is that? Like, she has no concept that that's her, because Eve just wakes up in a bed of flowers. She just spawns into the garden and she's like, where the hell am I? But then she sees Adam, and her first reaction to Adam is literally telling him that he's out of her league. It's just such a funny scene. She sees him, fair indeed and tall, yet, methought, less fair, less winning soft, less amiably mild than that smooth, watery image. And she turns to walk away from him because she's like, the girl in the pond, the creature in the pond to us herself is so much more better looking than him. Anyway, that's Paradise Lost. Anyway, the other epic I had to read, this is for my Renaissance class. This is pretty much what we spent almost all of October on reading, is The Fairy Queen. Like, this month just absolutely killed me. I'm exhausted, and I'm also in the middle of writing 2 essays, one on Paradise Lost and one on The Fairy Queen, so help me. The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser. Once again, we did not read this whole entire thing. Thank goodness. We only read We've only read book 1 so far, so this month I completed book 1, which is the length of a full-size novel in and of itself. The Fairy Queen is another epic poem all about different knights going on quests or adventures in fairyland, which does mimic and parallel kind of the strange medieval dreamlike England, going on their quests usually with different companions, fighting different monsters, all to attain the virtue of their knighthood. So for example, book 1 that we read begins with Red Cross Knight, and he is trying to attain the virtue of faith or holiness. When I started reading The Fairy Queen, it is written with like quite archaic language sometimes. The rhyme pattern is very demanding of the poet, so he has to kind of reach back for, you know, older words from different languages that have slipped into English and all that stuff. Like the language in The Fairy Queen is something to contend with in and of itself, but I started to read it, I definitely came at it like a chore. It is so long, it was very dense for me to get through, but once I got just a little bit into it, like you start to just get into the flow and the swing of The Fairy Queen, it became so much easier. And you know, stanzas that had previously taken me like laborious minutes to anguish over, I was just getting through. So it is very much just a question of, I think, just like getting used to it, getting into the style of The Fairy Queen. And after that, I actually did start to enjoy myself, especially when I started to pick out and identify stuff that I wanted to talk about in a paper, which always just really, really interests me and then gets me even more into the work. So that was really, really good. But essentially in book 1, we follow Red Cross Knight, who goes on a quest with this woman named Una, and he is trying to slay the dragon that is currently keeping her parents and her kingdom captive. Like there's this dragon that is terrorizing their kingdom. And so she comes to him with armor and says, "Can you please help me?" And he says yes. But he spends about 90% of book 1 of The Fairy Queen, his book, just getting waylaid and doing things he shouldn't be doing, and in general just being a complete idiot and stuff like that. It is plagued and riddled with monsters and weird side quests. It's like a very strange medieval video game, honestly. But that is The Fairy Queen. I think we're going to be reading more of this in November, so I could probably talk about it more then too. And I do have uni vlogs where I talk more about this, so that is The Fairy Queen. Then to balance out my school reading, because I really wanted just a break, something I could literally just turn my mind off and just read and have it be mind-numbing, I picked up a couple fantasy romance. The first one, again, was from Kindle Unlimited. I just saw this one browsing, and it is called Hooked. And I really do not remember who this is by. I don't want to call this a retelling because it's really not, but it is about Captain Hook and Wendy. It's set in an alternative contemporary world where I don't really know what Hook does. His name is James. Hook's name in this one is James, and he is either like a mafia man or I don't think he's in the mafia. Is he in the mafia? And Wendy, of course, works. Where does she work? She works at a coffee shop, but she is like the daughter of a very prominent other cutthroat businessman who is Peter Pan. He's not even called Peter Pan. Anyway, that's her dad, and Wendy is the daughter, and then there's Hook. This was the loosest thing based on Peter Pan. Just like get the Peter Pan thing out of your head, really. Essentially, this is just a super dark romance. It was fine. It was exactly what I wanted. Like, I just read it, and I don't think I think I could feel my brain like coming out of my ears, and that's really what I wanted. This was totally fine. I would definitely read more, maybe from the same author, maybe in the same category. I'll probably explore Kindle more about this, but what I would really like is just to like know people's jobs. I just love the vague job descriptions in fantasy romance or in romance or in dark romance or in vaguely mafia-esque romance. I really love the vagueness that I cannot have a single clue where this man actually works. Also in October, I decided to continue on with A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Court of Florence and Roses series. I read the first book in 2019. I really did not like the first book. I did not think it was very well done, and I was honestly just bored. I really liked A Court of Mist and Fury better than the first one. I don't think I would give it the full 4 stars, maybe either 3.5 or like 3.75, just because I thought this book was really long as well. This was another big book. And to be fair, a lot did happen, but I felt like it was just a lot of needlessly boring sidebars to the main plot. So in the series, we have Feyre, who is a mortal girl. Her family is starving, so she goes out into the woods to hunt. This is all in the first book, so no spoilers, but she kills a wolf, and the wolf ends up being Fae, and so she is taken to the spring court to basically stand trial for her crime. In this book, of course, so much more happens, and I did really like the plot of this book more. I love Feyre and Rhysand so much more. They were like the highlight of this book for me. I also, one really glowing thing I will say about this is that I really got like swept away and lost in the snowy, wonderful starlit city of Valaris, which is just a place in this fantasy world, and I really loved it. Like, if I had to think right now of a fantasy place I would want to go other than like Harry Potter or something, I think it would be like this snow-capped, wonderful, cute little place, like this town just nestled in the mountains where like they have the most glorious star heavenly features in the sky. On the whole, it was honestly what I was expecting, and it was another nice one to listen to just relax between classes and essays and blah blah blah. So I do not have the third book in the series, but I honestly don't know if I am in a super big rush to continue on with it, so we shall see. Okay, and finally that brings us to our last book of the month, and it is another big one. I don't know how I did this. I finished up listening to my audiobook of Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. This was the pick for the Dickens vs. Tolstoy book club for September and October, and I literally just finished this yesterday. I think my total like page count for this month is going to be off the charts, but I am really glad that I did have the audiobook for this as well. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I started off Nicholas Nickleby, and as you can see, I was enamored. Like, I was loving it so much. Charles Dickens started off so strong. He just weaved this story about Nicholas, his sister Kate, and their mother. Their father dies, leaving them very poor, and so they go to London to see if they can get any work or find any care from their well-off uncle Ralph. Ralph ends up being kind of a proto-Scrooge, and so does not help them at all, really, and he sends Nicholas off on a variety of different jobs. And so we follow Nicholas and Kate as well as they essentially get shuffled around the economy and the market and the job market of Victorian London, which was fascinating. Nicholas is first sent off to work at Dotheboys Hall, which is this school for boys that is just awful. Like, the conditions are awful. It definitely is very reminiscent of Oliver Twist and the workhouse, but this school is presided over by a headmaster named Mr. Squeers, is just treating these boys with the utmost neglect and violence, and it really does illuminate a lot of boys' schools at the time that were exactly like this. Kate gets to work at the milliners, Nicholas goes back to other places, he gets to work with like a theater company, at a counting house, and it was just really cool to like really get the ins and outs of these Victorian places. That's one thing that I just absolutely love with Dickens. Like, it is such a wealth of historical information. Like, you get to know exactly what everyone is wearing, what everyone is saying, what their accents are like, what architecture is like, what jobs are like, what a day in London in 1830s or 40s looks like, and it's just so nice every single time because he provides you with so much detail. That is kind of where I want to drop off saying amazing things about this book, because I feel like kind of at the point where my annotations stop, which is a little over halfway through. I think this book could 100% have terminated, just ended, been over. He just kept going, and I just kind of lost my way. Definitely fell off with my level of interest and all of that stuff because I felt like the plot could have been wrapped up hundreds of pages earlier, honestly, but in the end I still did really like it. Like, the beginning of this book is filled with quotes that just absolutely melts your heart and soul. There's also like very cool gothic elements in this house. We have a lot of villainous characters and the abodes that they come from and that they inhabit, and that like they both kind of influence each other in their villainy and evilness, and evil intentions kind of seep into the walls and into the flesh of, like, you know, the person who lives there and the house who keeps the person living there. That was really cool. I will have a whole vlog coming about my experience reading Nicholas Nickleby if you're interested, and as well the live show for this round of the Dickens versus Tolstoy will be on my channel. Coming in November. I will see if we have it announced down below. It's probably in the description box. And then our next read for just November, if you want to join, is Resurrection by Tolstoy. As usual, definitely let us know what your favorite read of the month was, because we are nosy and we want to know. Thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. And yeah, oh my gosh, I'm just very proud of myself for getting through all those big boys. But not really done reading the 2 biggest ones because I'm still in the middle of hacking away at the essays. So that's literally what I'm gonna go do now, is work on my essays. So until next time, that is when I shall see you. Ciao.